Well, many of you will know Barbara Jones, who usually sits up there in the balcony. But she also looks after our banners and tries very hard to place banners in our worship space that match the theme of our worship. So this week, when she asked me, what's the story we're going to be hearing this week? I said, Rahab the prostitute. You got any banners for that? Indeed, she had no Rahab the prostitute banner. This is not a story we hear very often. I wonder how many of you have never even heard it before. And no wonder. It's a story about war and conquest and, frankly, genocide. It's a story where the main character, the hero, is a sex trade worker. So, you know, what on earth shall we say about that? This story takes place 40 years after Moses and the rest of the Israelites have escaped from Egypt on their journey to a promised land. For 40 years, they'd been searching for a new place to call home. And then finally, just before he dies, Moses tells the people that he has seen the promised land, and it's just across the river in the land of Canaan. Never mind that a lot of other people have already discovered that this was a promised land. Never mind that God told Moses way long time ago at the burning bush that it was a land where many others already lived. As our own history painfully tells us, coming to live where other people already live can be complicated. Well, it still is. Think about our modern conflicts about immigration. Even in our modern world, we have not really figured out how to claim home in a peaceful way. So Joshua, who had taken over leadership from Moses, sent some spies across the river to get the lay of the land. And once there, their first stop was a prostitute's establishment. It doesn't tell us why. Make of that what you will. Now, maybe they knew that they would hear soldiers' stories there. Maybe they were looking for a place where no one would ask questions. But the king had eyes everywhere, heard about the spies in town, and sent orders to Rahab to turn over these strangers. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because instead of handing them over, Rahab hides her visitors. And she sends the soldiers on a wild goose chase to divert them. Why on earth does she do that? It is an incredibly dangerous thing for her to have done. So why would she do that? Protect foreign strangers who were on a mission to take over her city, which she would know would also mean to kill and destroy everyone and everything in their wake. As we know, history is written by the winners. And in the Canaanite version of this story, this is the moment where Rahab betrays her people. To them, she is like Benedict Arnold, the American general who defected to Britain in 1780. Or you might compare her to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was hanged for treason for being associated with a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. The story says that Rahab tells the two spies that she knows that their God is the God of heaven and earth. Well, how does she know that? Barbara Lundblad is a preacher who, thinking about this story, said, could it be that God is in places we have never been? We don't know what was in Rahab's mind. We don't know her experience. But in a moment when she was forced to pick a side, Rahab chose the path that she thought could protect her family. Because that's the conversation she has with these strangers, right? After she gets rid of the soldiers, she says to the spies, "Look, you now have the information that you need. I can get you out, but you need to make sure that my family stays safe." This is not as uncommon as you might think about in our world. There are countless women who have done very risky and very brave things to protect their families. Think about Laura Secord, who walked 32 kilometers out of American-occupied territory back in 1813 to warn the British forces of the impending American attack. Or think of BC mom Maureen Lee, who wedged herself between an 88-pound cougar and her 3-year-old Maya when it pounced on the little girl during a hike back in 2009. Or what about Rohingya lawyer Razia Sultana, who since 2014 has been working with and shining a light on the more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, fearlessly documenting the stories of her people victimized by waves of government and army violence in Myanmar, despite all the threats, and there are many, against her. When thinking about this Bible story, our former United Church moderator, Lois Wilson, compared Rahab to some of the people that she had met on her travels. She writes, "So many women in the Philippines are engaged in prostitution precisely for the security of their families. Fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, and even daughters. One family of 8 that I met in Thailand was supported by the money earned by their 2 daughters who were prostitutes in Bangkok. The daughters in the family had no other choice or option. Like them, Rahab's virtue was that she was willing to do what was possible and what was needed for the sake of her family, extended family, all who belonged to her." All who belonged to her. That's the question, though, isn't it? Well, because Rahab lived on the edge of the city, her home was actually part of the city wall, and her window became then the escape route for the spies. So she lets the men out the window, and they tell her her family will be safe if they stay in her home and if she ties a red cord in the window. So that's what she does. Now, we've heard already from Rahab that the whole city was already scared of those people massing on the other side of the Jordan. Was there more or less fear in Rahab having made this deal? Could she trust them, these spies, to remember the deal, to keep it? Well, in the 6th chapter of Joshua, we get our answer. Joshua spoke to the 2 men who had scouted out the land. "Go to the prostitute's house." She no longer has a name. "Bring out the woman from there, along with everyone related to her, exactly as you pledged to her." So the young men who had been spies went and brought Rahab out, along with her father, her mother, her brothers, and everyone related to her. They brought her whole clan out and let them stay outside Israel's camp. They burned down the city and everything in it, except for the silver and gold. But Rahab, the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, Joshua spared. Her family has lived in Israel ever since. As a survivor of that war, as a survivor in that story, Rahab is remembered for centuries. In the very first chapter of the very first book of the New Testament in Matthew's Gospel, there's this long genealogy of Jesus' ancestors. We often skip over it. So-and-so begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, and so on. But in that list, as one of Jesus' great-great-great-grandmothers, is Rahab. We are supposed to remember her. So I wonder why we are supposed to remember her. What insight does her story bring to our life and our faith today? Old Testament scholar Nana Nolan Farrell farewell says this about Rahab. Rahab's faith and kindness raise serious questions about the obsession with holy war in the book of Joshua. How many Rahabs are killed in the attempt to conquer the land? How many people with vision and loyalty are destroyed in the attempt to establish a pure and unadulterated nation? Today, I don't think we think of ourselves as conquering the land, but we do stake our territory in a variety of ways. And we do forge alliances, and we choose teams, and we pick sides. And we do tend to dehumanize people on the other side, whether it's a sports team, or a political allegiance, or a race, or a culture, or a country. Some of you will probably hear some of that later today when those who cheer for Hamilton are degraded by some of those cheering for the blue and gold, and vice versa. And today it will mostly be in fun. But sometimes it's not. Often it is not. We dismiss the value of those who disagree with us. We make people not on our side expendable. So perhaps Rahab can put a human face on those we might simply put on the other side. Perhaps she can remind us that not every opponent is bad. Perhaps she can teach us that not every stranger is our enemy. Perhaps she can help us rethink our strategies for winning so that the destruction of the other side is not our goal. So, banner or no banner, let us not forget this Rahab. And while we don't have a banner today, we do have some red thread. Perhaps you picked up a piece on your way in today. Take this reminder of Rahab with you today. May it remind you of courageous action from surprising sources. May it remind you to look for God in surprising or unexpected places and people, particularly those we assume would not take our side. May this thread remind us of all of the connections that bring us together and bind us all into a human family. May it be so. Amen.